episode of Docudays UA, where we are enjoying conversations with Ukrainian documentalists who are participating in the national competition this year. And the first film we are discussing is the Roses cabaret film, Irena Tsetsenko. Good evening. And before we start the conversation, this little kitchen talk with the carpet in the background and with these fantastic people joining us here tonight, there are two important things I would like to bring up. First of all, the Roses film will be available immediately after we finish our conversation. That's 8 o'clock tonight on the DocuSpace platform, and you can enjoy it all the way until the end of the festival. But please bear in mind that the number of views is limited to 600, so go ahead and watch it while you still have the chance. And if you happen to miss it, obviously you'll be able to see it later at cinemas. And secondly, of course, friends, please feel free to send in your questions to Irena through the video form, the video address form at the film's page on docuspace.org. So, Irena, congratulations, of course, on the premiere. Thankfully, this has happened. It would have been a lot nicer for this to be a huge, pompous premiere with an after-party, of course, but COVID has been treacherous this year, and it is thwarting plans. I know it's taken you a long time, 7 years, yes, almost 8. So how did you find this whole artistic path, and how do you feel now? Well, I feel now as if I've given birth to a third child, to be honest. Yes, the 8 years, that's the period it took between the first day of shooting. But yeah, to put everything into the film, everything that we needed to put in there, fewer years would not have been enough because the material is quite voluminous. So what happened on your first shooting day? What were you doing then? This was the first concert, the first time Dark Daughters appeared on the large stage at the Small Opera in Kiev. And obviously, we were shooting it not as part of our documentary project. We were just shooting it for a music video. But since me and my husband are documentalists, we sort of automatically started shooting backstages and recording everything. And we were later very happy with the decision to do so. So was this the performance at Docudays opening? No, this was their solo performance, their first show. Before that, they performed at the Dach Theatre, and also they had one performance in Paris, but this was their first major performance. So at which stage did you realize that this was supposed to be a documentary film? What was the event that made you realize that you were not working on a musical video, but you were going to try to pack this into a statement, into a work of art? Well, I arrived at this in quite a funny way, to be honest. You have to understand that Dark Daughters is not a musical group. They're a theatrical troupe, first of all. And we wanted to develop sort of a video almanac, so to speak. And of course, they mistrusted me originally because I was just a sound producer at the time, and I had this huge idea coming up. And then the Revolution of Dignity came along. And after that, you know, the events themselves took us to shooting it and to understanding that we were not simply amassing material, that we were going to try and put it into a story. A story of what? Well, I would call it a story the story of a musical and theatrical company who have come across such a tremendous event, an important event, which introduced philosophical shifts, of course, expectations, emotions, experiences, pain for the country. And after the revolution, we started shooting their performances to put this into a story and to present their portraits. Well, I can imagine, and I think our viewers can also imagine the response to this question, but still I'm going to pose it anyway. So there's there's the group that develops against the backdrop of the revolution, and we try to establish sort of a rhyming interrelation between the historical events and the development of the group. So that's what the film now looks like. But along with that, the film took a great deal of time to make. So has there been something that changed and evolved in your original idea as you kept working on the material? Well, I would say I learned, I studied directing, so to speak, on the go. And I finished the Bukowski School because I felt that I needed more knowledge, I needed to expand my education. Well, speaking about the things that changed, a lot has changed. The interview project appeared, which was simply donated to me as material for my film. I arrived at an understanding of how I was supposed to edit the material so that we could hear both the music and the talk and have a bit of an introduction to the girls. And I also arrived at an understanding. Originally, I was afraid of talking about this, and then I understood that we had to talk about their path, their creative path, their place in the world, and Dach Daughters really try to get you there in that point where you'll be searching for yourself. So I guess you sort of chiseled out more details in the original idea. Was there anything throughout the 8 years that made you feel that you were digressing, that you were moving away, that you had to give up certain ideas? I know you had like 2,000 hours of material. That's how much you've shot. So were there things that you realized you were not going to show at all? Not because you were friendly with the girls, but just due to your, internal convictions, due to avoid turning this film into something that it shouldn't be? Well, very quickly I realized that I wouldn't tell any personal stories of the girls because, as you said, there was a great deal of material shot and there were a lot of personal things and personal developments. But as soon as I understood, as soon as I started moving away into a personal story, I was turning this into a series, a seven episode series season, and I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to stay on point. I wanted to stay focused on this collective portrait of a woman in an artistic context against the backdrop of tectonic change in a country. I might be wrong here. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's quite difficult to display a lot of personality, a lot of personal stuff, because your characters are actresses, so they can manage very nicely what they reveal and what they don't reveal to you. And I like that you mentioned that you didn't want to get involved in the personal stuff, and the film is conscious of the fact that we were not going to bring out a human interest story, etc. It is a human interest story, but in a different way, right? And you were not going into the details. So how did you find your experience working with actresses who are probably quite good in front of the camera? They're probably doing a lot better than I am right now in front of 4 cameras here in the studio. So how did you find working with you? Were they not depriving you of the director's control over what's happening? How did you find it, the experience? Well, it happened so that I started working with them as a sound producer, and my husband had been in touch with them for quite a while, so I immediately entered their group as a friend. And the work, the trips, the revolution brought us even closer to each other. And at some point, there was absolutely no reason for them to hide things from me. But then at the same time, of course, they are actresses, and when they realized that I'm not joking, that the whole film project is serious, they were sort of taken aback a little. But then I mentioned that they could play in front of the camera, they could do whatever they wish, and the floodgates opened. You know, they took the chance. I allowed them to make fun in front of the camera, to act in silly ways, and a lot of productive material, a lot of interesting stuff came out of that. Well, and obviously everyone participated in the directing process. It wasn't just me personally. I realized that we were having fun and enjoying the shooting process, and then later I would have my way with these 7 plays that took place in front of the camera. This is probably about, it requires a great deal of courage, you know, to letting go of the process as you work on it, and then try to get it under control on your own. This is your debut film, so how did you find editing? And I know that you've had several versions of the film, so it's difficult for me to try and cut down 2,000 hours into an hour and 17 minutes. So could you talk a little about this process of cutting away, well, unnecessary stuff that got us out of focus and leaving the most important bits in? I don't know whether I can talk about this quickly and briefly. I can say that I've had and I have, and I hope I will continue having this Batman next to me, Kolya Bazarkin, who agreed to edit the material with me. When he came on board, I had an idea of how I was going to build my story, but I didn't know how I would put it into the 3 layers of editing. And yeah, I think we probably had like 3 films in total, and then we also needed to put these versions together to come at the ultimate come out. So do you have like an alternative film about Duck Daughters, which is about the same stuff but with similar material in? Yes, you could say that. It's also important to remember that we also wanted to show a great deal of music on screen, a great deal of their plays on screen, because their documentary language is very powerful in their plays, in their performances. And we did edit a number of tracks with their ideas, with their personal stories, but they didn't make it into the final cut because they were either contradicting the rhythm or taking the story away in a completely different place. How did you select the music, the songs that that made it into the film? It's quite obvious that they're playing in front of the camera, like in a musical film. You can understand what the certain scenes are about based on the songs they are singing. But I suggest you could have edited certain scenes with different films, because the topics they sing about, they focus on in their music, are quite similar. So the question is, how did you select the music, and did the girls affect this process? The girls did not affect the selection of music. They were very kind in following all of my instructions, and if I asked for something to be performed once again, recorded once again, they always agreed to that. And, you know, I think none of them have seen the film yet. They probably don't have a good idea. Oh, no, they do. They probably know the music that's been used because we signed a legal agreement, but they didn't impact the specific music that we selected. Some of them might be a little disappointed with the selections we've made, but I think they can understand as actors, as theatrical actors, that directors make the choice, and these choices obviously fall into a certain directorial concept. Well, obviously we had to use Roses, because Roses is the name of the film, and then also the other songs that laid nicely into this canvas of retelling the country's story, and also echoed the moods and characters of the specific ladies, and the personality that they displayed in their artistic work. Now, talking about the fans of probably in a fan of Duck Daughters conversation style, what's your favorite song? My favorite song is probably Cactus. Why? Well, because Zoe came up with lyrics that I find very deep, and because it's a very nice track from a musical perspective. It was mentioned, well, as I was watching the film, I thought how important the Roses song is, not just as the eponymous song. And people, the ladies mentioned that people were asking them whether this was a prophetic song. This was a song that seems to strike a chord with people and keeps striking a chord with people. And now they've released their album, which includes this song. This is the final song in the album, and as you listen to it, as you remember what it sounded like in 2013 and 2014 and in their Maidan performances, you understand what sort of a path you have traveled as a co-participant, as a viewer, because at the time I was a journalist, so I was sort of registering the events. I wasn't participating very actively. So I would like to talk more about the Maidan, obviously. You know, now we review the images in the film, and we can review them through the prism of the ladies' experience and through the lens of how it's represented in the film. So I know that you have been engaged with the material for a very long time, but the Maidan was sort of an external experience to all of us. So how do you feel with respect to one of the final scenes when the sculpture is put into the vault of the Second World War Museum? So you have this incredible sadness brimming at you off the screen, and you can try to decode this scene in many ways, and you can talk about it as part of the structure of the film. But since we're discussing the Roses the Roses track, what do you feel about the Maidan in the context of what has happened then, what is happening now? Can you decode this scene where the door is slowly closing on the sculpture? Well, we're spoiling the end of the film now. I don't think this is a spoiler, because the most important thing there is what you experience, and we can't spoil that. Well, I know, I see the parallel between the Roses song and this finale, because the ladies composed the song in 2012, actually, not even 13, so it sort of became a prophecy, you know? And the finale of the sculpture's story happened in 2017. We shot that a lot later, seeing it as a finale. So it was also sort of prophetic in nature, because the entire blossoming of post-Maidan culture, and now part of that culture is being clamped down on, is being put in a vault behind doors. So and there we are. Yeah, that's what I can say. So was that a prophecy, or was that just an emotion echoing in your soul? Were you feeling that something was going wrong, that we were getting off the rails? There's a pretty sad element in it when a lot of cynicism seems to come in, when it sort of sounds like we've always known it's going to be like this, and that makes the whole picture even more bitter. But it seems this emotion, this is an emotion that you shot and edited all the way back in 2014. But now we're here in 2021, so it sort of feels very continuous. Yes, I'm shocked myself, to be honest, but you are right. You know, looking at this post-Maidan culture, which is directly related with the establishment of the Maidan Museum, and back in those days, we had this feeling that we were finding ourselves in limbo, the establishment of the museum, and this limbo state has carried on, and that's where we are right now, to be honest. I feel that this is not about being prophetic. This is more about the fact that history is developing in a spiral, and unfortunately we are still far, far away from closing this frame, this gestalt. And until we realize that we are free to make our choices, that we are free to do what we want, not what we're being told to, we will keep coming back to the closed doors and beating our heads against the doors. Why do you think has this culture been put into this vault? Well, it's expecting its time at the Maidan Museum. So other things must be stored there as well. I think they're going to hold, by the way, a competition for the Maidan Museum head this year. We will be watching it very closely. I think it's going to turn into a bit of a series that we will have to follow very closely. So what's Pierre Chasson, the artist who made this sculpture, what's he doing right now? Oh, I know very well what's happening to him. He is still working on his sculptures back in France. He's also traveling around the world. Well, I suppose he's not traveling right now. Yeah, probably not, but I think he'll be back to it as soon as possible. So he's doing great, he's doing fine. He has made another beautiful sculpture in Paris with the face of another Dach actor, Dima Yarshenko. And he's got a lot of beautiful art, I think, coming along. You know, he has been prophetic in a way as well by leaving the sculpture in the street, just presenting it to the people of the Maidan, the people in the streets. He said whatever happens to it, it is going to stay an object of art, and it will, everything that happens to it will become sort of a performance through which it will continue its artistic journey, its artistic life. And it continues its journey through your film too. So there's another dimension to sculpture, which is also a performance in itself. When you were talking about the editing process, you said that you wanted to pack everything at 3 layers. Could you dwell on that a little? What are the 3 layers that we're talking about? Well, there's the general plan, the story of the country. Then there's the meso level, the group's story, the story of them as a whole, and then the 3rd level is the deeply personal story, this intimate dialogue with the viewer and with the characters, the searching for answers, believing in yourself, developing as a personality. I'm looking into my notes here, and I also sort of developed, well, split the story into 3 levels. I might just repeat what you're saying now, but in different words. I think there are 3 levels of abstraction here. I like in your film that it is not sort of assuming that it can spot reality as it is, grab it as it is, depict it as it is. This is the reality that breaks everything, and any attempt of processing it in full is is futile. You see, we are sitting now in a kitchen packed with television equipment, so, you know, reality can be unpredictable. And we're sort of trying to grasp something in it, but then at the same time, you're immediately giving the viewer a clear representation that there's the first level of abstraction, the actresses. You might never learn who they are, who they actually are, and that's fine. So you're allowing the ladies to act and you're supporting them in that. The second level is the level of their songs, where they're completely different. The art of music creation is a mind-blowing mathematical construct. And then there's the third level. Is it the third? I've lost track. It's the level of culture that, the level of the sculpture that is sort of trying to depict it all through stone. So there's your three levels that I found, and I really like this idea because there's also a lot inside each of the levels, and we seem not to be talking about anything personal, but it is still there, and I would very kindly, but probably not particularly kindly, like to get to that. I would like to bridge to it. The art of duck daughters, their songs, their personal biographies, the way they interact and can be juxtaposed with the history of Ukraine over the last 8 years, right? This is about womanhood, female experiences. It's about motherhood. I think some of the most touching elements is the story about Anna Nikitina and Zozo, who says, I need to go here and there, I need to go to the school, and I have my rehearsals, etc., so much to do. And time has passed, and the ladies went on to give birth to more children. So this seems like a super female story, shot by a super female. How did you experience the material? So as a female director, not just a director per se, what were you trying to depict here, and how did you look for a way to communicate womanhood on the screen so that it doesn't overflow, so that there isn't too much of it? How did you manage that? Oh, that's a difficult one. This was probably the most difficult thing about this film. Because first of all, after the Maidan, over the period, I gave birth to 2 children myself, so I experienced the process firsthand, so to speak, and I experienced the this situation when, as an artistic woman, you are making a choice. Do you devote yourself to your child, or do you devote yourself to your film project? And it is a painful choice, but this is also a big amount of happiness when your child grows and she starts looking for her own niche in art. And it is sort of a prison in one way, because you are limited in many ways. There are so many limitations put on you. You have this small person next to you, and there you have it. You're going to be responsible for them for your entire life, and then for another small person. But then, on the other hand, motherhood brings in a great deal of new experience. It makes you open your eyes to things. And, you know, saying openly, openly about these topics, it seems trite when you start talking about these topics in words, putting it in words. But when you show all the intricacies in screen, the intricacies that are never mentioned, the pain when you can't fit into your old dress, down to the most immediate physiological experiences that you go through as you're pregnant, and all of them stayed on stage until literally the very last moment before giving birth. So it must have been difficult, but at the same time they can't just take a break from acting. They want to perform on stage. Every woman is an actress and she wants to keep performing. So yeah, and they all try to repress these emotions to a certain extent. So it was difficult for me to grasp the emotion whenever it manifested itself and make it, you know, full-fledged, to make it a difficult structure on screen so that it echoes the music, so that it interacts organically. This was one of the most difficult things in working, because the topic of woman in art, being an artistic woman, is, you know, a heroic feat. Being a mother is a job in itself, a very difficult job, and I really wanted to represent this moment. You know, I didn't want to talk about cabaret actresses, focus on their affairs or whatever. I didn't want to focus on that. I wanted to focus on the experience with the child and with yourself. It's very difficult not to lose yourself when your child is born, and it's about whether you devote the entirety of your personality to them or you keep something to yourself, whether you economize a little until they're like 18, so you don't hear from your child that you're living their life instead of them. You don't want to hear that. When you give birth, you sort of go through another stage in education. So I hope I have been successful.
Yes, I think you succeeded, and let's move on to another question about the optimism. And as I imagine, how much time you've put in already when you filmed it, you already have an idea of what you want to say, the idea of femininity, of womanhood, of some bodily experiences, and all the whole slew of things that you don't want to lose sight of, this gentleness, the love, and you have this 2,000 hours of footage, and at a certain stage, maybe yes, maybe not, maybe this would be the last drop. So what is the internal effort that you must put in to go back to this gentleness, to the love for your characters that you spend so much time on? Well, indeed, I had this therapeutic situation at a certain stage when I made myself, sort of forced myself to step aside, to step back from those real-life duck daughters. I stopped communicating with them at some point because they are also my friends, and to sort of move them behind the screen, to make them into characters that are whose story I'm telling, because at the initial stage there were questions what this or that lady would say if I do this or that, whether they curse me or not. That was my thinking. And then I finally gathered up the courage to pretend that I don't know them and sort of mold them. And this was the point where everything shifted into place. There came a moment of, you know, facing yourself, of facing the truth about yourself. And again, seeing something as if through the eyes of someone else, so matching things and then having the whole story coming up. And when was this break that you took to sort of switch off and then come back? So it took me several years. I sort of shut off You know, they were chasing me, so to say, when, and nobody even understands that it takes so much time. And since they are women, do they have patience? No, they want everything and at once. They are sort of engrossed in this immediacy. And yes, it's all in the moment, but it's such a filigree stage of creation. You cannot overdo it. Maybe it's sort of working with a marble when you see this all coming out of the marble block. And we've already received our first question from Anastasia Sharapina. Whether you had the moments that were left out of the movie and why? Oh, I could write a book on it. Lots and lots of things. A whole multitude of them. I wouldn't know what to call it. Yes, indeed. Well, what was the most difficult one to omit? Yes, there was a painful episode. This question of directing on the part of your protagonist, when Rusa called me and told me that her dad passed away, and the following day was the funeral, and she wanted us to film it. And I told her, Rusa, are you sure you need it? Because it would be extremely hard to rewatch. But she told me that that was her ego, and I knew that I needed to follow it. It was a very painful story, a very painful moment. And maybe she, on her part, also directed it, because she sang a song over the body of her father, and all of Duck Daughters joined her in that song, and it was extremely powerful. So Kola and I, we tried to fit this episode in, but we couldn't. It turned either her father died at the Maidan, or God forbid something happened to Vlad Troitsky, and no matter how powerful it was, we couldn't do it because it derailed the story, and it was even stronger than Maidan because it was so intrinsically personal, and that's why we left it out. Although it's not the tradition in the documentary filmmaking to show the funeral. What do you mean? So is there an agreement that you don't do it because it's too emotional, too speculative? Maybe partly it's speculative, it's maybe too literal. You know, kids, dogs, old people, and these literal, so visible suffering. It's not the acting, and but you do have children in your film, and this is a wonderful film because they are not objectivized. They are on screen. They are sort of this vital part, and they are inseparable from that moment, from that shot. We wanted to avoid this excessive focus on one child, on one mom. We wanted to not just to portray that it's the Duck Daughters who go through this whole palette of feelings. No, we wanted to show that it's about all women, and this overtaking this directing whether it influenced the directing and your whole idea when it overtakes you. Did it influence you? Because at the very least, from the other side of the camera, no, in no way. I don't think that he saw the film. He just heard some echoes of it. So in no way, no influence on his part. But this is how he made them to be, and this is what I wanted to share with my audience. And in fact, the film has his performance, the doghouse, so, as it's called, and I'm really happy that I managed to film it. And this is a wonderful play, wonderful performance, and it's given me the ground, the sort of the lens of seeing all the events through it and not just the bare portrayal of bodies on the Maidan. Yes, indeed, I'm truly grateful to you, because every other director indulged into it, and you see the footage from the Maidan and the bodies, and then they are, and you're anticipating it, those bodies, and thank you for not following this lead, because we're sure we see that. In fact, you're sort of anticipating it, but it's not there, and it's good. Indeed, I try to shift this point of catharsis from the documenting of the events to shift it to the art, because it's no less powerful than the real life. And could you tell us a little bit about how you learned? You've been learning all along the way, because you've been educating yourself how to become a mother, how to become a mother for the second time, and then you were studying at Sergei Bukovsky's school, and indeed, how did it leave its trace in your work? I'm really grateful to Sergei Bukovsky and to Victoria Grigorievna for taking me in, and because they pulled all these ideas together. They did not try to impose anything. They just showed me those perfect examples of documentary films and showed me their sort of deficiencies and this is why I'm so grateful, because I was having doubts whether to use the interview, because this is again one of those other taboos, because again I wasn't the one who filmed it. It was another female to whom I'm grateful, but again we had to cut it out because it again shifted the attention focus, and Sergei told me that no, try to seek and find something in there, and because there is something precious in it. Indeed, when I watched the film, I understood that there is something really special there. It's not me thinking about just become the Minister of Culture. The moments with the ladies, all of that. Maybe it's the moment that chose me. Maybe it happened mid-conversation, because when people are opening up, they share their personal ideas, so they become frank. And the most interesting thing starts in 20 minutes. So was it the mid-interview? Why did you decide to keep it? What is its level? Is it the abstraction level? We see the girls on the backstage, and we see their presence in the media, the camera, them, and the camera. It's clear that you decided to keep it because you saw something in it, but how did it play into the general narrative? I would have to tell you more about the lady who filmed the interview, because first I took this interview away from her, and then I sort of started getting to know her. She works in IT, and then she started volunteering, and she organized the school of sort of human studies, where she teaches people how to find themselves, how to find yourself. And she saw the ladies on the Maidan, and she found their performances therapeutic, because she saw the reaction of the people, and that's where she came up with the idea to catch up with them, to show them as personalities, because they are usually interviewed as the band. And that was the interview when they were sitting in front of the camera separately, and they were telling their own stories. Yeah, there were traditional questions on the power, on art, on government, and then there was this real welcome. What's beneath the surface? And for someone it's the traditional art, and for someone it's the looking and trying to find yourself, and all that humor, everything just was left out. By the way, Rusa also wanted to become a minister of culture, and this is I was holding on to it until the very last, and I'm not sure how much you need to learn to become the minister, but yeah, it's the feeling that I'm just going to do it. And this is how this flower blossomed, and what's on the surface just came out. And have you tried to organize those interviews yourselves, to talk to them yourselves? I tried to do it once, and it turned into this laughter, this raucous laughter, and I understood that it just turns into those kitchen camaraderie, and I understood that we wouldn't have this same background to do to this interview and to organize this conversation, because it had to come from somewhere. Oh, where was I? I guess I'm lost a bit. Yes, you were talking about trying to organize an interview yourself. Yes, when I analyzed this interview, I understood that must be a very special lady who interviewed them. So I asked her to interview me, and it was now the moment of truth for me, because I was behind the camera, so to say. And I, in fact, got to know them because she was approaching very carefully to the very core of their personalities. We tried to script it twice, but we didn't include it into the final cut. But it gave me the inspiration and the power. Her name is Katerina Chroptinska, the School of Human Studies. She researches our Ukrainian archetypes. So this left its mark on the film, and so this it showed their modus of existence. Oh, I'm not going to spoil it any further. And if it's not a spoiler, if you already told us how you came to this, how you sculpture it and have the final image, when you came to the conclusion, when did you and how did you understand that this is the grand finale? How did you came to it? How did it influence that original idea? We filmed the whole story on the Maidan. We saw the whole process of its creation of this so-called sculpture, and then I was at a loss what to do, whether, I guess it was in 2015, this anniversary, and we came to the Maidan and saw that the sculpture disappeared. And one of the producers, Alexis Nov, who in fact brought this artist, and he organized the story. So I insisted that we start looking for the sculpture, and this is when it turned into a detective story. And I understood that if I follow this detective plot line, I would have this image, the structure of the film, which will lead me to this finale. And yes, indeed, we found it somewhere in the vault of the Gonchar Museum, overpainted. And the restorer, who was then peeling off this white paint, it was the paint that was used in, I guess, in industrial paint. Of course, those were the communal services responsible for it, because they want to sort of hide it, not to be not to attract the wrong kind of attention. And that was our story. That's how we found it. It's a bit of a detective story, the story of the return into the frame, return on screen, that it is the sense of the existence of the art, and this is it, standing on the Maidan, and then it disappears somewhere. And this is where our job starts, this job of a documentary filmmaker, of a researcher, of an investigator. And this is a very beautiful story. It's it looks beautiful on screen, and at first you omitted that, but it's an extra step towards really good ideas. So that is an incredible aspect. Thank you to Samir Sasson, who actually pushed us to it, and thank you to those people who saved it, who returned it. And it's interesting to find where it's stored and what's going to be its its fate, maybe in the Maidan Museum or the Museum of the Modern Art, but it will be. It will be somewhere. It will be always, at all times. And also thanks to your film. So we will have to finish up. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for the questions. And if you have any further questions, you will be able to ask them via video chat. Please watch the film. We're waiting for its theatrical release, to listen to this fascinating music, to watch the concerts live. And I would like to remind you that you have an opportunity to vote, and the audience votes for the films in the national competition program, Docu-Ukraine, on the Docudays website or on the DocuSpace. Let's look for it together. And tomorrow I'll tell you where exactly. And right now, in 6 minutes, you will have access to the film Cabaret Roses, and tomorrow we will see at this pseudo kitchen with the director the story of a toy horse. You will we will have a conversation with the film crew, and I won't spoil the ending. So please come back to us, watch the films, and have a good evening. Thank you.